Well, hopefully you enjoyed a little Monty Python take on what hospital births are like. The idea that, it's impersonal, that they have all these machines and really don't care that much about the patient, that they're going to cure you of, oh, look, my internet came back. They're going to cure you of your condition, right? All that sort of thing really kind of turned off a lot of moms in the late 70s, early 80s, and people started to look at other places to deliver their babies besides these very medicalized places. So birthing centers started to emerge. There was the occasional birthing center prior to that era, but they really started to blossom. Almost every large city has at least one birthing center. A lot of times they're very closely associated with a hospital, so that if something goes wrong, then it's a really quick transport over to the hospital. A lot of hospitals have actually started to include aspects of birthing centers in their delivery experience, so that you can deliver in underwater, which is something that birthing centers really brought to women. That you could birth your baby in any position. That was something that birthing centers introduced, and hospitals have started to allow. Letting fathers and siblings and moms and other people of the mother be present was something that birthing centers allowed and hospitals wouldn't. You might have seen in that Monty Python clip where they said, to the father, well, you're not involved. You got to get out of here, right? That used to be the attitude of hospitals, and now they've realized that it's an advantage to have dad present. And it's thanks to birthing centers that these kinds of ideas really entered the hospital setting. So if anybody's listening who had a very really nice birthing suite and stuff like that at a hospital, and you're thinking, oh, hospitals aren't medicalized, a lot of that moved over thanks to birthing centers introducing them and showing that it doesn't harm the baby to have more comfort. It actually is beneficial to mom to have more comfort and things like that. There's a subset of people who have been opting for home births during the coronavirus pandemic. I think there were a lot of moms who probably would have had their babies at a hospital who chose to have their babies at home because they were kind of concerned about being in a hospital. During coronavirus, some dads weren't allowed to be present during the birth and things. So some moms tried it out. It's been historically a small percentage of moms who have chosen to deliver at home for a lot of reasons. One, I think a lot of people who are hearing about home births, somebody else considering one, the first thing they worry about is safety, right? Like, what if something happens? What are you going to do? And then usually the next thing people are concerned about with home births isn't that kind of messy? And the good news is usually the nurse midwife who attends the birth, or the midwife doula who attends the birth, has all sorts of absorbent things and plastic and all sorts of things that can be used to make sure that nothing in the home gets permanently tainted, and then you can have this nice quiet and like sort of bonding opportunity, and not have to be checked out and not have to drive home when the baby's a day old, and all these things that are part of delivering your baby somewhere else. There are risks associated, of course, with a home birth. If something does go wrong, you're an ambulance right away from the hospital rather than being in or near the hospital like you would be in the other locations. So there are things for people to consider. Usually you would want to make sure that you're otherwise a very healthy mom, a good candidate for an unassisted vaginal birth. If there's any sign that the baby's breech or something like that, you probably wouldn't want to deliver at home. So moms have a lot of things to decide. Who's going to deliver? Where should I deliver? What should I do about pain? There's no reason for a mom to suffer, but because there are lots of different options of what we can do. Early in labor, a lot of times moms will be offered some kind of narcotic. Demerol is the brand name of basically an opioid type of injection that will make mom kind of not care as much about the pain that she's experiencing. It's not that it takes the pain away. It just makes her kind of maybe feel a little disembodied from it, right? Like it's not really her who's experiencing it. And so she's able to bear it more. It might help her to sleep. If you've been in labor for a while, like some moms will be in that early part of labor for a day, and they're just getting exhausted because they can't sleep. Every time they try and sleep, they'll get a contraction that wakes them up and stuff. So, these kinds of narcotics can be really helpful in that early labor period, but they don't really do much later on. And there's some concern if you administer them later on that it might slow the progression of labor. So later on in the delivery process would be the use of an epidural. And the idea with an epidural is that you deliver a numbing agent into the sac around the spinal cord, and it numbs basically that pelvic area, right? They now have what are called walking epidurals, so that no longer do the legs become completely numb like they used to, 40 years ago. Today you can have this walking epidural where you can still feel your legs, but the key critical areas that are hurting don't hurt anymore. It blocks it. Some people refer to epidurals as spinal blocks because it just blocks the pain messages that would normally be conveyed up the spine. And for some moms, they actually will slow down in their labor because they're in so much pain that they're sort of fighting the contractions that would be opening the cervix. And so for some moms, the addition of an epidural actually will speed delivery up. For other moms, the addition of an epidural will slow labor down. So there's it could go either way depending on, how the body responds to it. A lot of moms who are sort of panicky and scared, the epidural will calm them down because they're not feeling every single twinge and it's not scaring them as much. So epidurals can be a really, great addition to a birth plan. Back in the 80s when, we're moving into sort of birthing centers and the sort of idea that you're not really sick, it's just, childbirth, you can do it. There's a lot of pressure to avoid pain medication. And moms would talk to each other about whether they had any pain medication during their delivery and sort of have this pecking order about whether, you had succumbed and used an epidural or something. And actually the doctors had kind of given messages about how if you use Demerol, or it could cross the placenta and the baby would get a dose of it, or if you use an epidural that it could slow delivery. And so there was these messages that, maybe you're doing something wrong if you use pain medication. Luckily, that time has passed. And since at least the mid-90s, doctors have been encouraging moms to be open-minded, even if you think you want to go with an unassisted, with regard to pain medication kind of birth, at least ahead of time, sign the waiver for the anesthesiologist in case you do decide at the last minute you want an epidural. Just be open-minded that the goal is to have a healthy baby. The goal is to have a healthy birth. The goal is not to be able to go sit with your friends at the park and say who had an epidural and who is a true mom who had a natural childbirth. Like, that's not the point. Having a good birth is the point. So pain medication is something that women have to decide on. And also you might make a decision and you might change it at the last minute. So I thought I'd share with you this sort of 1980s perspective with this little clip from Look Who's Talking. And what I want you to notice is this nurse who's sitting on the left-hand side reading the National Enquirer or whatever she's doing. Hear what she says to Kirstie Alley when she asks for her epidural. And look at the attitude that she expresses when Kirstie Alley asks for that. So I'll see you on the other side of this video.